Hello, I'm Linda, and this is No Frills ASMR. So, I thought today we could discuss the big three automakers, and this is talking about the big three probably 1980. So, they're the big three American automakers, and they were known as the big three back in the day. I think now the big three is Toyota's part of that. But back when I was growing up in Detroit, the big three were Ford, General Motors, and Chrysler Corporation. So those were the big three automakers. I am most familiar with Chrysler. That's where my dad worked. And Ford because there's a lot more just out there about Ford, but also my husband's dad worked for Ford. General Motors, I'm not quite as familiar with. But growing up in Detroit, certainly a lot of my friends' parents worked for General Motors. So I thought we could talk about, these three and just, I don't know everything about them. I'm no expert on cars. Although I say that, but to be honest, one of my special skills is knowing every symbol. So when we drive along, I can look at a car and know exactly what model car it is. What make, not model, make. So yeah, it's a special skill. It is absolutely useless. I always think if there's, some emergency and I need to recognize a car, I'm the person who will be able to do that. I have some useless skills, and that's one of them. Anyway, all right, so let's start with Chrysler because, like I said, that's the one I'm most familiar with. So Chrysler, all these brands, look at this cute thing I made. All these brands are like Chrysler, Ford. Oh, I just gave away. Did you see it? Ford and General Motors were all kind of the company, and they had brands underneath them that their dealerships could sell. So they were like the top of the umbrella, and there were brands underneath. So for Chrysler, their brands were Dodge, Plymouth, and Jeep. So for Chrysler, Dodge was kind of the sporty model cars. The muscle cars were generally Dodges. Plymouth is generally less expensive versions of the Dodge cars. And then Jeep, we all know Jeep. Jeep makes Jeep, and they always have. But they were under the Chrysler umbrella. Dodge was started by the Dodge brothers. There were two brothers who started Dodge, and they built chassis and other parts for cars. And Ford actually hired Dodge to make the chassis for the Model T. No, the Model A. What was the first one? Model A. I guess Model A, because it was like his first car. And all Ford actually did was throw the tires, like just basic stuff, onto the Dodge brothers car, chassis. So a lot of people kind of think Dodge, they didn't quite get the credit they deserved, but they made a deal with Ford that he didn't have to pay them up front, and he'd give them, I forget, it was like 10% of the company. But later he needed money to open a plant. I think it was called the River Rouge plant in Detroit. And so he didn't pay them, and they sued him. It got kind of ugly. So they ended up going off on their own, and they started Dodge Motor Company. But both of the brothers died, I think it was in 1920, and the one died of the Spanish flu. And the second brother, I don't know whether he died of complications from the Spanish flu. I read on Wikipedia somewhere that he died of cirrhosis, but it was the same year. They both died. And so then the company ended up after a while being sold to Chrysler. So Chrysler has Dodge, Plymouth, and Jeep. So we'll talk more about that, but let's just put them over here. And then we have General Motors. And they have probably their most well-known brand, Chevrolet, who makes Corvettes and a lot of other cars. GMC, which is General Motors Corporation, but they go by GMC, and they make mostly trucks, I think. I think that's right. Cadillac, which used to be their very high-end, I guess it still is, but it used to be considered very high-end. I don't think people go out of their way to get Cadillacs anymore. Buicks, which are also pretty high-end cars. And then Oldsmobile. There are other brands under these umbrellas, but these are the big ones. And the ones that, like, if you went to a dealership, you'd see usually these brands together at the dealerships. Now, Oldsmobile was a company. Olds. The guy's name was something Olds. And so they were a company before this, but General Motors ended up buying them out. And the story with that's really interesting, I thought, is that back in like early 1900s, Oldsmobile was building cars, and they were, having all the guys get together and build a car from the ground up. And they did that, and it was very expensive, and a lot of times, mistakes were made. So Oldsmobile started saying, hey, how about we have it on a roller, and one group of people builds this portion, and then we roll it, and the next people do the next portion, and then we roll it, and the next people. Sound like something familiar? Sounds like an assembly line. So Oldsmobile had made an assembly line, and in fact it was a problem because a lot of the men who were working there, and I think they were all men, got bored, of making. They didn't like it. They didn't like the assembly line. But that's the original assembly line, apparently. And so we'll come back to that. Okay, so these are the General Motor brands under their umbrella. And then you have Ford Motor Company. And I think their two big brands were Lincoln and Mercury. So if you went to a Ford dealership, it would usually be Ford, Lincoln, Mercury dealerships. So what I was going to say about the assembly line, though, is Henry Ford, who started the company, was very well known for, it is often credited with creating the first assembly line. But really, it was Olds from Oldsmobile. But Ford did put it into practice in a big way. He had guys who, just put one bolt in. That's all they did all day, one bolt, one bolt. And so it was kind of tedious work. But the really smart thing Ford did, he started the $5 workday. And he said, I'm going to pay guys who come work for me $5 a day because I think people deserve a living wage. And at the time, the big wigs in the world said, you're going to go out of business paying people that much. But the truth was, he had people come from all over the country to go work for a $5. They just thought that's great pay. So he had people come from all over. And Ford started the 8-hour-a-day work week. And at first, he publicized it as 6 days a week, 8 hours a day. But pretty quickly, he turned it to a 5-day a week, 8-hour-a-day at $5. So that was a pretty good work week. And being from the Detroit area where Ford was headquartered is Dearborn. And they have houses there. Like there's a whole area that's known, like, I forget what it's called, something like Ford. I don't know. Anyway, but they're all houses that Ford built for his employees to live at. Now, he did early on have what he called the social department, and he would come around and you weren't supposed to drink or gamble. So he was kind of being I forget what they call it, like a papa state or something. Like he'd go around and check on people and make sure they were following the rules in order to get paid and to get, I think he also gave, what do you call it? Like stock, like shareholders. Anyway, he was fair to his employees. He wasn't a perfect person. There's a lot of, he kept making cars and stuff for the Nazis because he didn't like Roosevelt. He, I can't remember if it was him or his sons. He had one son, but then a grandson. One of them, I think, was a known, going out with other women other than his wife. And there were stories, and in Detroit, a lot of times the company is called Ford's, not Ford. It's called Ford's because everybody worked for Ford's. So that's something you hear in the Detroit area. Now, because we were a Chrysler family, we didn't like Ford. It was a competition all the time. So we always said, found on road dead, or fix or repair daily. That was funny. I don't know why. For some reason, we didn't really care much. General Motors must not have been doing as well back then, because it seemed like it was these two who were fighting with each other all the time. Anyway, okay. So what else are we going to talk about here? Well, Chrysler was run by a guy named Lee Iacocca during the 80s, maybe I think just the 80s. And Lee Iacocca used to work for Ford. And while he was there, the oil crisis had happened and gas was very expensive. And at that time, the American automakers were making these big gas guzzling muscle cars. And the Japanese cars started coming in, Toyotas and Hondas, and they were little smaller cars. They didn't use as much gas. And Lee Iacocca was like, we got to do something about this. So he proposed to Ford, and this I think would have been Ford's grandson, Henry. There was Edsel in there, and then it went Henry, Edsel, and then I think there was another Henry. But anyway, so it would have been probably about that time. But Iacocca had designed a car he called the K car, the K model. And him and I forget, there was another guy. But anyway, they designed the minivan, which was like a van, but smaller and front wheel drive. And the K car was like a lighter weight car, but front wheel drive, which saves on gas and actually makes it a safer car for, especially like living in Michigan where there's snow, you'd rather have a front wheel drive. And Ford was like, oh no, we don't want that. We want to keep our muscle cars. So Lee Iacocca leaves Ford and goes over to Chrysler, designs what becomes known as the Dodge Aries and the Plymouth Reliant, which are K cars. They were the K model. And eventually, a little later, I think in 81, makes the minivan, which end up selling like crazy. And Ford tries making later on, and like, I think they start making like the Taurus, and they try to make a minivan, but I don't know if they ever make a good minivan. General Motors comes out with the Saturn, which was their idea to kind of compete with, the Japanese cars that were coming in. But I don't think Saturn ever did that well. Anyway, so I had a Aries K car. Used Aries K car was my first car. And it was cool. It was called the Raz. Anyway, so that's just the little history of these makers. Chrysler is now owned, Chrysler got sold to Daimler Benz and became Daimler Chrysler, which was a German company. And they basically wanted to kind of get rid of all the upper management and make it all German. So they did that. And then there was a lot of backlash with the board of directors, I think. So then it ended up getting bought out by, I can't even remember, was it Mitsubishi? I don't even remember. But now it's not even American anymore, I don't think. So Chrysler's, I can't remember what it's called right now. It's not even called Chrysler anymore. Ford is still owned, and I think it's still operated by the Ford family, I think. However, they gave such good health insurance and pensions and everything to their employees way back when that they can't afford it. And I think it's really hurting Ford right now because a lot of these, I mean, thankfully, a lot of these men are still alive, like my father-in-law, but they are, they worked for Ford in the 1950s, and Ford is still paying for their health care and everything. And that may end up, I don't know. I don't know how they can deal with that. General Motors, I think they're still around. I don't know what they're up to right now. I mean, all these, yeah, can still buy all these cars, right? But I don't know how they're doing. I'm not really sure. So anyway, that's just a little bit about those companies. I thought we could take a look in here. I am sure that in my handy dandy book of cultural literacy, they are going to have some information. Because they would. So let's see. I had my husband draw that umbrella. I'm not an artist like that. All right, let's look up the big three. The big bad wolf. Big Brother is watching. Oh, no. How many of you are worried about that? Like every time I talk about something sketchy, not that I talk about anything sketchy, but I have to like put everybody's phones in a drawer. I'm like, somebody's listening. What am I doing? Where? Oh, it must be under the. I'm sure it's in here. JK, LMNOP. Wonder what I was keeping there. I have the bills right there. Huh. Well, maybe I'm wrong. No, it wouldn't be under the. I'm surprised. I for sure would have thought. Oh. Well, I know we could look up. Oh, big three. How did I not see that? It's right there. All right, 435. You guys know I just like the sound of this book. That's why I look stuff up. The big three. In the American automobile industry, the three largest manufacturers, General Motors, Ford, and Chrysler. But like I said, this book was published in the 90s. Oh, look, here's an assembly line. Let's see what they say. A line of factory workers and equipment, along with a product being assembled, passes consecutively from operation to operation until completed. Assembly lines are found in many industries, but are particularly associated with the automobile manufacturing. They do not say who. I'll tell you what, let's look up Henry Ford. Will it be under Henry or Ford, you guys? I would think Ford, but yep, Ford. Okay, 442. Oops, there it is. Here it is, Henry Ford. Oh, I think we looked at this picture one time, didn't we? I forget. Anyway, an American industrial leader of the late 19th and early 20th centuries, Ford perfected the assembly line. Perfected. See, when I was taught about it in school, they said he invented it. So, anyway, Ford perfected the assembly line technique of mass production, by which the Model T automobile and its successors were made available for the multitude. And they did. They sold so many of those Model Ts. Like, everybody. They were inexpensive. I mean, for a car. And everybody had them. Ford said history is bunk and was often considered a man of extreme conservatism and hard-headed practicality. The Ford Foundation, which he established in the 1930s, has funded a great number of educational projects. All right, so there's Ford. Do they have any of the other? No. Okay, let's see if Lee Iacocca's in here. Something wrong because I'm sure he's in here. If Ford's in here, how do you spell? Would be right here, right? Ion, Iacocca. I don't know what I'm doing right now. It's gonna say, well, could it be under? It wouldn't be under Lee. That would be dumb. I must be spelling his name wrong. Well. Maybe he's not in here. See, I knew he'd be around Ford. What the heck? Am I spelling it wrong? Oh, I-A. Okay, Iacocca is spelled Iacocca. I don't know what I was looking at. There he is. That's Lee Iacocca. I think I told you guys, I don't know why, but in high school, for some reason, I read his it was his autobiography. Which it seems like a weird thing for a high school girl to read, but I was fascinated by him. Iacocca giving thumbs up to reporters after announcing that Chrysler's 1984 profits were $2.4 billion. Wow. Lee Iacocca, an American businessman of the 20th century, the son of Italian immigrants, he worked his way to the top of Ford Motor Company and later rescued Chrysler Corporation from financial collapse. He wrote a best-selling autobiography. Yes, he did. I don't even know who runs General Motors. That's how little I know. I couldn't even look it up. Anyway, so there we go. A little bit about the big three automakers. Feel free to let me know if you have any, I don't know, thoughts or anything I got wrong, or just want to say hi. So, big three, we got Chrysler, we've got Ford, and we've got General Motors. Let's see if I can put these in order. Okay, Plymouth. Who's that guy's Plymouth? Chrysler. GMC, obviously. General Motors. Jeep. Who's that? Chrysler. Lincoln. Who's that? Ford. Oldsmobile. General Motors. Cadillac. General Motors. If you don't know, guess General Motors because they're almost all. We'll do this one. Dodge, Chrysler, Mercury, Ford, Chevrolet, General Motors, Buick. Okay, so I'll see if I can think of a car made by Buick, LeSabre, Chevrolet, which is also known as Chevy, Camaro, Cadillac. I want to say Seville. Is that Cadillac? Oldsmobile. Didn't they have like the Grand Marquis? I don't know. GMC, I just think truck. I don't know. Lincoln Town Car. Mercury. Oh, yeah. Mercury. Boy, I can't think of. I can picture it. It's got a cat on it. Cougar. I don't know. I can't think one. Okay, Plymouth. Well, I said Reliant earlier. That's the K car. Plymouth. What else did they make? They actually made some kind of muscle cars earlier on. I can't think of any. Did I spell that right? That looks wrong. Jeep. I don't know. Jeeps are Jeeps. I mean, now you could say Durango and Dodge. Well, Charger, Challenger, trucks, Ram, Dodge Ram. I feel like Dodge is the coolest of the Chrysler, so we'll put that at the top. Then Jeep, then Plymouth. Ford. Okay, a Mercury. Shoot. There's a song that just goes crazy about a Mercury. Lord, I'm crazy about a Mercury. So maybe they just named their cars Mercury. I can't think of like a model. So anyway, there we go. All right, guys. Well, thanks for watching. Talk to you later.